October 12, 1963, the Gators take down the Bear in Tuscaloosa. In his Sunday column, legendary Tampa Tribune sports writer Tom McEwen set the scene, writing, "The Florida Gators made October 12, 1963 the most important in its history of up and down football and the longest day for Alabama coach Paul Bryant. They came from ridicule in their home state to a pulsating upset of the University of Alabama in a field where Bryant has never been beaten, where no Alabama team has lost in 16 games. They whipped the nation's third-ranked collegiate team, and they whipped them with the weapon some in this state think Bryant invented: defense. We've got no chance," Florida head coach Ray Graves told the media after his Gators edged out the Richmond Spiders 35-28 for the first win of the season. Graves was simply echoing the sentiments of the masses. Upon his arrival in Gainesville after a highly successful run as an assistant coach under Bobby Dodd at Georgia Tech that included a split national title in 1952, Graves sought to gain some national attention for a Florida football program which had began to find some momentum under head coach Bob Woodruff throughout the 50s. During the early 1960s, SEC scheduling was handled by the schools and not by the league office. Teams were required to play at least 6 league games, but some opted to play 7 or 8, and Alabama did not typically include Florida on its schedule. Prior to 1963's matchup, the Gators and the Tide had only tangled 4 times since the end of the Second World War. Since Bama captured its first national title under Bryant in 1961, the Bear threw his weight around when Graves requested a series between the two schools. When Bryant agreed to 2 games in 1963 and 1964, Graves asked which year the Crimson Tide would visit Gainesville. No, you misunderstand me," Bryant told Graves. "You'll come up here both years." Graves obliged, and Florida was booked for back-to-back trips to, at the time, just Denny Stadium, a house of horrors for Alabama opponents. The Crimson Tide were unbeaten in Tuscaloosa under Bryant.
Football fans, this is Otis Boggs in Gainesville, Florida, with the head man of the Fighting Gators, Coach Ray Graves. Ray, I know you're looking forward to this season because you're going to play the real toughies in the league. I guess that's about as tough a schedule as we've had since you've been here at Florida.
Yes, it is, and of course, where we play them is a little tough too. Playing in Atlanta, Georgia, and Auburn, Alabama, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, those are not the best places to win football games in the South.
You appear to be walking into the Lion's Den when you go in those places,
well,
right?
That's right. Of course, in the opening game, of course, Georgia Tech's record, I think they looked it up, they've lost 3 home games since 1903 as openers. So this is, of course, recognized one of the tougher fields to play, and Florida's never beaten Auburn in Auburn. But we don't ever worry about that. We know that there's a certain advantage playing at home and on the road, and I think this is, of course, what makes it a great game, trying to figure out how much difference it does make. But every team's a different team every week, and you have to play every week. I guarantee you that the schedule of teams play now, teams are so equal that if you don't play good ball game every week, well, you're going to get beat. And of course, I think we're going to see supposedly more upsets, but really the best team won that day, and it wasn't really an upset.
Ray, let's talk a little bit about the Gators in particular. They play exciting football. All of our Florida fans know that. The great game they played against Penn State. Who are some of the offensive stars that we can look forward to seeing each Saturday out there?
Well, certainly the starter and the playmaker is the quarterback, and Tommy Shannon is that. And he has that knack of coming up with a big play repeatedly. Tommy is really one of the smartest quarterbacks I've ever coached or worked with, and I think he's, of course, the kind of boy that you want at quarterback position.
The unranked Gators were 1-1-1 after falling 9-0 to Georgia Tech on opening day, tying Mississippi State 9-9 and getting by Richmond for an ugly win at home. Florida first baseman Tommy Shannon doubled as the team's starting quarterback that year. The lefty from Boston, who later in life would go on to form the T-Bird restaurant group that would develop and own over 60 Outback Steakhouse locations across California, led an attack which featured Russ Brown and Barry Brown on the outside, along with Larry Dupree and Jack Harper in the backfield.
Football fans, this is Otis Boggs right here in Gainesville, home of the Fighting Gators, talking with the #1 quarterback of the Orange and Blue, Tom Shannon. Tom, I've been watching the practice sessions, a lot of familiar faces back, guys like Russ Brown, Barry Brown, Big Frank Lasky. The Gators seem to be well lined up for a good season this year.
Yes, sir. I hope we're well equipped. We're going to be doing our best, trying to get in shape here in this hot weather. We've been working out at home the last few weeks, everybody on their own.
Well, Tom, Florida has played some real exciting football since Coach Ray Graves has been here with that wide-open pro-type offense. You got plenty of good pass patterns that you're going to spring on them this year, aren't you?
Yes, sir. We have a couple of real good ends down here, too.
Tell us a little bit about those two ends that you throw to. They're your favorite targets, I know. They both have the same name, too.
Yes, sir. Russ and Barry Brown. Of course, there's no relation. Russ is a 2-year experienced man, and Barry was a redshirt last year due to ineligibility because of transfer from Michigan State.
So this will be his first varsity year at Florida, right?
Yes, sir, it will.
Tom, we have some pretty good running boys in there, too. One in particular that I recall from last year who should have a great season. I'm speaking to Larry Dupree. I imagine you have confidence when you hand the ball off to Larry.
Yes, sir. You couldn't ask for a better man in your backfield to hand the ball off to.
Who are some of the other guys that we're counting on as good running men in that backfield?
I'd say Jerry Newcomer and Haygood Clark are back, and we have a few new boys with Alan Poe and David Hires, Alan Trammell, a few of the other boys.
Tom, this season you're going to face some of the real tough clubs, and of course we do every year, but this year you're going to take on Tech in the opener on TV. You're going to play Alabama, you're going to play Miami and FSU, and a flock of good ball clubs. Would you say that we will see more good passers on our schedule this year, perhaps than ever before?
Yes, sir. I'd say there's more good passers in the country this year than ever before.
This seems to be a banner year for quarterbacks.
Yes, sir, it is. I've been reading about it. I've seen it, and I know a lot of them.
Well, Tom, when you call those automatics up there, how quick do you change your mind when you come up on the defense there and it's shifted on you?
Depends on who you see in that defensive line. That's just it. You see big boys like I'd hate to have Frank Lasky playing against me. I'd probably be changing all day long against him.
Well, there you have it, fans. The word from Florida's top quarterback, University of Florida Fighting Gator quarterback Tom Shannon, the old left-hander who's going to be throwing them this year for the Gators.
The Tide was entering into the 6th year of Bear Bryant's tenure in Tuscaloosa. Alabama had hit rock bottom after posting 5 losing campaigns in 8 seasons between 1950 and 1957. The Crimson Tide finished 4-5-2 under Red Drew in 1954 before 3 disastrous years under Jennings Whitworth, including 0-10 in 1955 and back-to-back 2-7-1 records in 1956 and 1957 before Mama called and the Bear returned home. Bear got the Tide back on track right away in 1958 with a 5-4-1 record, 2 top 10 finishes in 1959 and 60, and in 1961, Bama ended a 2-decade national championship drought, the longest stretch without a national championship in program history since the Crimson Tide won its first natty in 1925. Alabama didn't miss a beat in 1962, rising to #1 in the rankings before slipping up in a 7-6 November loss with quarterback Joe Namath leading the way. The Crimson Tide finished 10-1 that year, and after a 3-0 start to 1963, Bama had won 24 of 25 games heading into their matchup with the Gators. Number 3 Alabama rolled over Georgia, Tulane, and Vanderbilt by a combined 81-13 to open the season. But Bryant was not impressed, telling reporters that the Tide must play 300% better going forward. Facing an expected sellout crowd of 44,000, the Gators, a 2-touchdown underdog on this October Saturday, gathered around their coach before the game. Graves told his team that he wasn't always straight with the press. "I want you to know that I would never put you in a game where I didn't think you had a chance of winning," he told the team. Defensive lineman Jack Katz, who would go on to be named 3rd team All-SEC that season and later on in life found the brand Panama Jack, was so pumped that he took his helmet and smashed a blackboard. Panama Jack, Outback Steakhouse, and a freshman walking around campus by the name of Spurrier. Don't sleep on the 1963 Gators, folks. Florida received some bad news before the game. Ray Graves announced that top Florida sophomores wide receiver Barry Brown and halfback Jack Harper would be limited due to injuries suffered against Richmond. Other offensive playmakers would have to step up. In the first series of the game, quarterback Joe Namath and the Crimson Tide were stuffed deep in their own territory, and they had to punt from their own end zone. Tommy Shannon and the Gators turned great field position into a 3-0 lead in the first 3 minutes of the game, thanks to a 42-yard field goal from Bob Grubby Lyle. Each defense stood tall during a sweltering 91-degree afternoon. Florida's defense forced 2 fumbles and picked off a Namath pass, all in the first 16 minutes of the game. 3 early turnovers would be tough for any team to overcome, but the Alabama defense, led by linebacker Paul Crane, responded in a big way with 2 stops within their own 10-yard line. On the second 4th down hold, Florida star fullback Larry Dupree was held just inches shy of a first down at the Alabama 6-yard line. Florida held a slim 3-0 lead at the half. The Alabama offense started to show signs of life in their first drive of the second half, driving from their own 11 down to the Florida 36-yard line. It looked all but certain that Namath was going to lead the Tide to at least a tying field goal, but the stingy Florida defense had other plans. Namath dropped back and threw another interception, this time to leaping, twisting Haygood Clark, who came down with the ball at the Florida 20-yard line and returned it to the 32. Fast forward to the opening of the fourth quarter. 4th and 2 from the Alabama 30-yard line. Graves decides to go for it. Shannon dropped back, and the lefty found Florida halfback Alan Trammell. Not the Detroit Tigers Alan Trammell for you baseball fans. Different Alan Trammell. All alone on the left side of the field, but Trammell could not hold on to the pass at the Bama 10-yard line, and once again the Gators turned it over on downs. Great defense and sloppy play on offense meant little action on the scoreboard as the game drifted deeper into the final quarter. With just under 10 minutes left, Florida took over at their own 25-yard line and finally broke through in the running game. Larry Dupree rumbled ahead for 17 yards before 2 quick Shannon passes to Trammell and Russ Brown put the Gators in business at the Alabama 42-yard line. Running back Dick Kirk, filling in for an injured Jack Harper, took the next carry over right tackle, cut back, and outran the Crimson Tide secondary for one of the most important touchdowns in Florida football history. Jimmy Hall added the point after to put the Gators up 10-0 with 7 minutes remaining. The 42-yard touchdown run by Kirk, a Fort Lauderdale High School product, was the longest against an Alabama team in 6 years. Florida's defense remained dominant, but it could not maintain a shutout down the stretch. However, it did slow Namath and the Tide just enough to have the clock work on its side. Until their final drive, in fact, Alabama never got past the Florida 22-yard line on the day, but Bear Bryant's team went down swinging. Namath led the Tide on a 67-yard march and scored on a quarterback sneak from the 1-yard line with just over 2 minutes remaining in the game. Alabama went for 2, but Haygood Clark batted down the pass attempt in the end zone to preserve a 4-point lead for the Gators. Florida recovered an onside kick and ran out the clock for an improbable upset over number 3 Alabama. It was 10-6 Florida. Florida coach Ray Graves called it a team victory, and he gave considerable credit to the receipt just before game time of over 300 telegrams from Florida supporters. The Tide only managed 211 yards of offense on the day. Namath was an abysmal 10 for 26 with 104 yards through the air, and his 2 interceptions were just 2 of 5 Alabama turnovers against the swarming Gators defense. On the Florida side, Kirk, who authored the headlining 42-yard score, finished the day with 4 carries for 57 yards. Shannon only added another 95 through the air, and Larry Dupree led the Gators' rushing attack with 21 carries for 83 yards. Someone asked Bryant what he thought of Larry Dupree after the game, and Bryant replied, The same thing I've thought about him all year. He's terrific. Following the game, Bryant went straight across the field to shake hands and congratulate Graves upon the victory, but he had a hard time doing so because the players had Graves up on their shoulders. They paused long enough for Bryant to shake hands, and then they continued on. Florida played a fine football game and deserved a win, said Bryant. It was a great victory for Florida, and it could have been much worse if they hadn't dropped so many passes. I guess you take the backhanded compliment from the Bear. Florida's 10-6 win that day over Joe Namath and the Crimson Tide was Alabama coach Bear Bryant's only SEC loss at Denny Stadium. Graves continued, "It took a lot of hard work and prayers to beat a great team like Alabama on its home field. Under the circumstances, it was an even greater win because of the criticism this team had gotten thus far. Our boys prayed before the game and wanted the doors closed after for a short time for another prayer." As the team plane approached Gainesville for landing, the players were able to witness the glow of bonfires that had engulfed the intersection of University Avenue and 13th Street. Thousands of students poured into the streets to celebrate the win near campus. The airport was just as crazy. Florida's plane was forced to circle for landing while the police helped to clear the fans off the runway. After the 1963 loss to Florida, Bryant would not lose again in Tuscaloosa until his final game in November of 1982. In between, Bryant and the Tide won 57 straight games in Denny Stadium. "It was probably the greatest victory that I can remember since I became a head coach," said Graves, after arguably the biggest upset in school history. Florida's next win in Tuscaloosa would not come until 1990, with Spurrier and the ghost of 1963 leading the way.
George, I understand you didn't bring up that 17-15 upset you boys pulled on us last December in Miami. I wish you would have said something about that. Yeah. You kind of.
But sometimes you lose the ones you're supposed to win, don't you, Tom?
George, I thought you'd bring in that 17-15 upset you boys pulled on us last December in Miami. You're right, though. Sometimes you do lose the ones you're supposed to win. I hope you boys are in good shape for this season because we're going to get down to Miami and try to atone for that loss. We're going to do our best to beat you. Steve, I understand you boys are pretty well loaded up in Tallahassee this year. Is that true? You might say that, Steve. We hope to be one of the best ever. Coach Graves and his staff are as eager as we are to get started. I think we'll be at our tops. I hope you hear that, George. You might say that, Steve. We're all pretty anxious to get the season started. Coach Graves and his staff are just as eager as we are to get started, and we hope we'll be at our best. Did you hear that, George?